We are now going to talk about improving children's on-road cycling with something that sounds to me extraordinarily interesting, immersive reality training. And Dr. Dan Bishop, who's a researcher and senior lecturer on sport and exercise psychology at Brunel University, is here, and we think that his presentation is here for him as well. There was a slightly anxious moment, but Dan, you're very welcome. Big round of applause, Dr. Dan Bishop.
Okay, yep, I'm on. Welcome. Yes, my name's Dan Bishop. I'm at Brunel University, London, and this project is funded by the Road Safety Trust. It's still ongoing, should be wrapped up next month, and we did it in collaboration with our colleagues at the Bikeability Trust, notably Emily and Benjamin. And well, it's been a true collaborative effort with a very long cast list, and a few people are named here. My colleague, Dr. David Broadbent, can't be here today, but our doctoral researcher, Tamara de Kaidek, is. Tamara, could you stand up and just give everyone a wave, please? Yes, please. She's worthy of a round of applause. You will find out how integral Tamara has been to the running of the project, which has been a fabulous experience for so many reasons, and hopefully that will become evident as I talk. And we also have Ian here, who is our cycle support officer in Healing. How did you get up there? That was. He's not normally that stealthy. Ian has been an absolute rock, and that will become very apparent as well. And we have two bikeability instructors from Hillingdon Local Authority, and that's Raz. Or Razia, would you like to? No, he doesn't want to stand up, just going to wave. And Darryl. There we go. Thank you. So, I just want to give a bit of backdrop. I've done a lot of cycle commuting in and around London, so I'm a North Londoner born and bred. I've cycled to Brunel in West London more times than I can count. I've cycled over to Sutton. I cycled into the city, into Canary Wharf in various former lives and roles. So I've done a lot of cycle commuting, and in retrospect, I realized a few years ago that I might be quite expert as a result of that. Maybe I'll leave you to be the judge of that. But it also occurred to me, when you look at the statistics of surveys of cyclists and the near misses and accidents they have, I didn't have that kind of frequency of near misses or negative experiences out on the road. And I wondered, is there something that I'm doing right? So that's part of the catalyst for what we're doing here. Becoming a father, I've got two children. In the comsifying of the presentation, one of them's been taken out. My fabulous 7-year-old, who is attentionally challenged, let's put it that way, he can go AWOL all by himself. He doesn't need help with this presentation here. But there's my eldest, who's now 10, and I used to have to lift him into that swing. But coming from a parent's perspective has been hugely influential as well. Before the pandemic kicked in, I thought, well, let's combine my expertise and my colleagues' expertise. I'm a psychologist by trade. I operate within a sport, health and exercise sciences department, and Bikeology was formed. There are bike shops up and down the country called Bikeology. I found that when I set up a website, and I had requests for all kinds of bikes throughout the pandemic. But yeah, we're drawing on our expertise, and now it seems more timely than ever. That's readily apparent. And a little nod to my colleague, Bal, who's one of our business development managers, who got in contact with Emily and also Ian at Hillingdon and had relevant conversations with them. He's a great networker, better than me. So we made an application to the Road Safety Trust, their small research grant scheme, right in the depths of pandemic mode. And in higher education, that meant lots of us staring at a screen for extended periods of time, rapidly coming up with online materials for students to engage with. I'd been doing it for years, but it had to crank up several notches. It was a dark place for me, but I'm so glad that Bell made me do it. Well, he didn't make me, but he encouraged me strongly. We were awarded the funding at the beginning of last year. A lot of hard work, not least because of COVID restrictions. That will become apparent over the course of 2021. And here we find ourselves today. So it's a really collaborative effort. The photo you can see on the right is a visit that Emily and Benjamin made to our lab/teaching space, and Ian is in there. And also Ian's line manager, Lisa, who's been hugely supportive of everything Ian's done. This slide epitomizes a number of things. I want to do another specific nod to Benjamin for his input with regard to on-road assessments that we included as part of this project and the checklist that we developed, which you will see fairly shortly. The images on the right is about my experience. So when you go out on roads in lockdown, it's very quiet. And if you're trying to get video footage, which I was trying to do, and what you can see bottom left of those images is the 360 camera, the reverse of it, if you like, pointing back at me. We didn't use it in quite a 360 way, as will become clear, but what you can see in the top left of those figures is a mock-up of what I did at home with a couple of screens. I didn't have 3 available, to see what it looks like when you take 360 video, morph it a little bit in video editing software, and then wrap it around flat screens. And then the very top right image, and this is an illustration of the cast list here. It's our old lab manager, Tom, is standing in the background there. But this was that moment when we did rear projection and we could see that this footage I was acquiring on the road could actually work for us. And it was very exciting, and the hairs are going up on the back of my neck just talking about it. It's been a real labor of love, this, and I feel very passionate to be a part of this exciting development, and I mean that more widely in the context of everything that's been said today. And that's really a mock-up of me, but I was doing a lot of fiddling with cameras on bikes out on the road to get all the footage. So what were we trying to do? Well, we were looking at Year 6 children in the borough of Hillingdon and seeing if we can improve their ability to look around. So I'll say it again, it's drawing on my research expertise, but also drawing on my experiences of cycling and thinking, well, what does it mean to be safe? What do I do that I might have done so well considering how few negative experiences I had on a bike? And looking behavior is important, and that's a combination of 2 things. It's eye movements, which lots of researchers, me included, are slightly over preoccupied with, and head turns, looking around. It's not least looking behind you, and that's something I'll come back to. And then improving this thing which is out there in the research sphere called situational awareness. It applies as much in driving as it does in cycling, knowing what's going on around you. And if you're not doing the first one, it's hard to do the second. And then the icing on the cake, if you like, which we will demonstrate, is actually improving on-road cycling performance, having done something in a laboratory. So the children, the best part of all of this was doing the on-road assessments, which I'll come back to as well, with these children and their parents. So Hillingdon is a borough in the west of London, just around 1/3 of a million population. Nearly half of that it says BME on the website. I'm not sure that term is still used now. Ethnic minorities, I believe, is more accurate now. And just to give you an idea of the kind of target age group, they're about 15% within the borough. So there's one thing I realized I didn't include on here. It's send information, and we did get that as well. I won't talk about that, but it's very, very relevant, not least in terms of some things I saw in the data. But that's as much as I can say, given the time constraints that we've got. Still a very diverse sample, as you can imagine, from the borough that I've just described. And we randomly allocated these children to one of 2 groups. An intervention group, as we call it, who came into our lab and did our intervention. Terrible word, but we use it in research. It all sounds a little bit clinical, and people in straitjackets. And then a control group who don't do that. And really importantly, we had equivalence between these 2 groups. So there were no differences in their cycling experience as they came in, and we asked them to detail that. No difference in their cycling confidence, something I'll come back to, but it was specifically in relation to the 4 core functions. And there was no difference in the average duration since they did Bikeability Level 2 training, which was generally a matter of weeks prior to taking part in our study as a rule. And that's with Ian and his colleagues, of course. This is what the study looked like. You can see these 3 blue phrases at the bottom: pre-test, post-test retention. Again, researchers' terms. It means before we did anything, after we did something, and then in motor learning, we typically have retention tests to see if what's been learned has been retained, because that's what's useful information. And that period, if I'm honest, if you're looking at lab-based studies, can range from 24 hours after you've done something to several months. You can see the average duration at the bottom there, somewhere between 19 and 103 days. Quite a lot of variability, which we'll report. For one child, they're doing it in less than 3 weeks, everything. Then another one is taking more than 3 months. But the important difference is that the intervention group came into the lab and did the immersive reality training. But we collected a lot of demographic information. They constantly reported their cycling behavior throughout the study, because that's going to be relevant. If you've got a lot of cycling happening between the pre-test and the post-test, for example, then that might affect their ability to perform on various tests, including situational awareness tests, which are very much like hazard perception tests for driving, and I will show you an example of what those children did at home with their parents. And the on-road assessments I've mentioned we'll come back to. This is what the children saw. This was their journey through the study, and they found that really useful. We got quite a lot of feedback on that. So it's the child's version, including, of course, the £40 Amazon gift card they got at the end. That was an incentive. That came up frequently, and Tamara would be able to tell you that. So the online assessments, I'd like you to just put yourselves back in the depths of lockdown here. So we're doing things online in a way that we might not have done normally, but in hindsight, maybe it was a good idea because it was very, very efficient. So Tamara did more Zoom meetings than I can possibly count as I stand here on the stage, with children and their parents sitting at a screen, doing a number of things, including, for example, reporting their cycling self-efficacy, as we call it. And that's a psychologist term for specific self-confidence with regard to specific activities. And you can see how there are some questions relating to cycling behavior on the road. They also did these situational awareness tests. And if the technology will work for me, pop down in, let's start with the practice clips. Yes, please. So they wouldn't see all of that, but they can maximize their YouTube video. And there would be a freeze frame before the clip would then start. Did you see a bus stop? Anyone? Yes? Not a whole lot of confidence in the room. Let's do one more, shall we? And then I need to move on because we're up against the clock. Now you'll be paying more attention. This one's easier. Sorry about the advertising. Were you in the cycling lane? Yes, you were. Right, thank you. Well done. You got 50%, let's call it that. So the business end, the intervention itself, and what you can see is a snapshot here of the laboratory. And I'd like to bring you back to that COVID lockdown type thing. It was like a ghost town on our campus and in our building. Getting technical support was really difficult. I and my colleagues, we constructed that frame. We already had it. It's only a fraction of the overall thing we will ultimately construct, probably ourselves again. And we use rear projection screens. What we've got here is a setup that I genuinely believe could easily be rolled out nationwide if you've got the motivation to do it. The cost of what you're seeing here is actually pretty low. And that should be reason for encouragement. If you could identify a room somewhere, a building in a school, in a local authority, then you've got the potential to deliver this. And we've got an almost off-the-shelf protocol that could be used. And hopefully you'd agree with what we did. But top right there, you can see we've got the whole COVID thing. So Tamara was PPE'd up to the max doing this. Temperature sensors on foreheads for parents and child as they came in. And social distancing, which you can see was probably easy in that big space. And we had snacks for them as well. Not really incentives, just to make sure they stay on their A game when they were doing what we asked them to do. What did we ask them to do? Well, I'll show you some videos in a moment. 5 different videos of routes around Hillingdon that I took, and then we turned them into virtual ones, totaling around 50 minutes. And I've got some things highlighted in red there. Now, this is a really important development, and this is one of my nods to Ian, who's been brilliant in terms of developing this, and this is true collaboration. So with regard to looking over their shoulder and seeing what's happening, it's something that Ian, I think you raised. It might have been in the back of my mind, but I'm giving you the full credit for it. This is so important. It's a game changer because it's so obvious in hindsight that we need to do that. So we've got these 2 screens here that the children would turn around and look at. Tamara could check that they're saying the right thing. On the right-hand one, they had to name the color of a car that appeared. It was just a PowerPoint slideshow with the color of the car changing with the same street backdrop. So it was static. The same for the other side. There was a cyclist there on the left. So sometimes a cyclist would be there, sometimes they wouldn't. So if they were doing a left turn, then of course it would be looking at both and reporting it back to Tamara, who could see on her screens. The bottom 2 red things, so that the left of those, that's the eye tracking. And you can see that's my eldest actually, just modeling using these very expensive, arguably overpriced eye tracking glasses. But it was really useful, not in terms of collecting data about eye movements, but for Tamara to see what they were looking at and to be able to give them regular feedback about that's good looking, well done for looking up ahead, for example. That was really useful. And then that right-hand one with the seemingly white screen, we had a brake lever hooked up to the laptop, so we could see when they were pressing the brake. And again, Tamara could reward them, say, good braking, when they approach virtual junctions. Now, I must say at this point that is a child's cycle mounted on a cycle trainer. There is no connection between what the child is doing pedaling-wise and what goes on in the video. They are separate, but that is not an impediment, I would say. And I think the data speak for themselves. But if we pop over to here. So this is my colleague David. I just got this on my phone. You can get a feel for what we were doing. This is actually footage in my local area. Yeah, they didn't see the Windows logo. So this is early stages. It's, well, relatively early, somewhat fetal. We're just fleshing out how this all looks. You can see I moved myself round him. Good camera work, if I say so myself. And so he'd be looking at this T-junction. You can see he can look right up the road. Oh, well, you could see what David was doing. So I think that's probably enough. And maybe that's a saving grace for me with regard to the timing here. So at another point, I can make these videos publicly available. And Emily's nodded saying, yes, please. Yeah, please do that. But you definitely get the idea from seeing that snapshot you've got there of Toby and what you saw David doing. And one thing I can say from my own experiences is that it really does feel immersive. And I did a lot of filming. I thought it was going to have no effect on me. But when I went over speed bumps in the video, I felt my stomach flip in the lab consistently. And I was genuinely shocked. So I got on the bike and I was shocked at how quickly I was absorbed in something I'd seen hundreds of times by that point. Very, very powerful. And we've got some nodding around the room, including from Patrick, people who just sat on that bike and found out what it was like. So yeah, really encouraging, but it becomes more encouraging when you see the data. I'm going to hand over to Ian for the on-road assessments. He'll just talk through what he did in terms of designing this and taking the children round. So this is really interesting.
Hi everyone. So obviously we've seen a lot of the stuff that's been taken in the lab online. We decided we need to do some real risk assessment, not risk assessments, real assessments of the cyclists. So we allotted 6 Saturday mornings with each young person getting a 20-minute assessment. It was a standard route from the front of the university, passing the junction, turning left, turning right, doing a quick left, quick right, and back round in a circle back to the university. So the instructor, myself, Daryl or Raz, would be cycling behind one of the students or pupils, and we'd basically say, turn left here, turn right there, turn left here. Similar to like you'd do in a driving lesson or inspection. We had some generally good moments, but we did have the odd, oh my God. Okay. Primarily, a couple of times as we come out from the university, the child, if you bear in mind, has received Bikeability, been in the lab, done the online assessments, proceeded to be cycling on the wrong side of the road. So those were some or one of an instance of a oh my God moment. So we addressed that situation and carried on with the journey. As I say, it wasn't a coaching session, wasn't an instruction session, it was just assessing what they're doing. Are they looking behind? Are they signalling? Road position. So in line with the 4 core functions. When we got back to, at the end of the session, we would, as instructors, complete this document, which was the assessment ride document. Something that was developed between us and, I think, Ben, who threw in a couple of questions that he would like to ask on it. So each of the instructors that was involved, at the end of each 20-minute ride, would complete that document.
And
now,
it would look like that. So we have Raz and Daryl's forms, or at least the front page of the forms for 2 children whose details are obscured, of course.
Now, some of the riders that were being assessed would actually ride that route we found in 4 minutes, because they were exceptional cyclists for young people. And there were some children that actually took the whole 20 minutes. That was because they were either tentative at junctions, not knowing what to do, not knowing how to do, or forgetting how to do it. So we would just try and carry them through, cycling behind them through that particular route. Dan was thinking at the time about reducing that time, but we actually kept it at 20 minutes because it was the boundaries of what we were seeing from the first session.
So what did we find? The cycling self-confidence, I've got my own laser pointer here because this could be useful. So there's a lot going on in these data, but we collected data on the 4 core functions. This is before, after, then some weeks later. If you look overall here before, the control group, on average, rated themselves as more confident. After people had come in the lab, it flipped. The intervention group did it. This is not what we call statistically significant, but it's a shift in the right direction. And then a few weeks later, that seemed to maintain itself. I think I won't get into the specifics of that because I don't have a great deal of faith in the quality of those data for a number of reasons. Not because of things we did necessarily, it's just one of those things you learn in hindsight. The situational awareness tests, so the couple of clips that you all had a go at, so doing those online, pre-test, post-test and retention, you can see at each occasion the control group outperformed the intervention group, but again, not statistically significantly. So what you're seeing as differences in the bars are some things that we would disregard as researchers. But there's something about those data as well. This is where I expected to see the differences, and you might have done too, because these video clips seem to be similar to what the intervention group were doing in the lab. I can think of reasons why it did not emerge in this case as well. Although one thing I will point out is if you look at the profile of the bars, you can see an improvement from pre to post for the intervention group as well, which roughly maintained to retention, whereas there's arguably a dropping off trajectory for the control group. But sorry, this is where it gets super exciting and interesting. So we've got the overall bars on the left-hand side here, but they were assessed on those checklists you saw according to the 4 core functions, which I've abbreviated as observation, position, communication, and priorities. And you can see quite a stark difference. And to put that into context, if I were to go back, that is potentially like the difference between never and frequently doing something, or occasionally and always doing something that we're seeing, the differences in those bars. So the intervention group, they improved in such a way that post-test, clearly observation and communication quite significantly at retention and post-test. When we got to retention, interestingly, position and priorities also became statistically significant. I would like to hypothesize that because the looking around and the communicating became more automated, they could free up cognitive resources to focus on their positioning and their priorities and became better at that as well. And that's often how learning happens, because subtasks, if you like, become automated, and therefore we can devote our resources to other things. But to see this positive transfer, as we call it, to the real world, and I do a lot of applied research, it's like a holy grail. So I really want to make that point clear, because I think up until this point I might have understated it. To know that you can get a child doing 50 minutes of watching videos and doing our lab protocol, and then to go out on the road and to have such a marked change in their behavior is really exciting to me. And it is to Emily and to other people here as well. So what did the children think? There are some lovely quotes here. I'll let you read them for yourselves, but I would like to point out the number of children that said it was like being on the road, which is really important. Whether they knew that or not, well, that's another question entirely, but that's what it felt like, and I can relate to that based on my experience of sitting on the bike. I was surprised about something I had created. And sorry, that sounds a bit egotistical, so I created, but I'd filmed all the videos to put it together. Things they like least. I'd like to draw your attention to lots of nothings there as well. That's entirely self-serving, right? The glasses, eye-tracking glasses, they feel phenomenally light when you first put them on. After even 15 minutes of usage, they get to feel very heavy on the bridge of your nose, and I don't blame them at all for saying that. And the seat did occasionally keep dropping. It was embarrassing. It was unprofessional. The pedals were not loose. Someone said that somewhere. It's how they felt, because it was just kind of freewheeling, effectively. It was turning quite easily. Interestingly, and in contrast to the self-efficacy data, as we call it, when you look at it, nearly everyone, every child, and we've got a few control group participants in here because they had an opportunity to come in the lab after we'd finished the study, and most of them took us up on that offer, and Tamara ran them through it, and they've given feedback here as well. You can see that about half of them said their confidence in their ability to cycle had changed a lot, and the other half a little, and there was one person who said no change, probably a good cyclist. So conclusions. That was a whirlwind tour, and I've lost track of time. I hope I'm not absolutely ruining the program for the rest of the day. Immersive reality training, I genuinely, hand on my heart, this is the most confidence I've had in any research findings I've produced, or other people for that matter, has the potential to improve children's ability to cycle on the roads, more specifically with regard to those two core functions, making good and frequent observations and communicating intentions to others. But I would argue there's been this knock-on effect in terms of the other two core functions as well. And the video-based tests, I know how those could potentially be ironed out and made more relevant. But speaking of relevance, is it relevant if they get better at doing a video-based test? What we're interested in is cycling safely on the road, right? And so that's the gold dust right there. So we've turned from having the Bikeability Trust as a partner to having them as a funder, to devolved funding through DFT. And as part of the widening participation brief, we're doing a fairly huge project in a fairly short period of time, and it's going very well. The first part of it is a large-scale survey that's gone out to children and parents, and this is children in years 7 to 9. About 400 have responded so far. We're looking to get to 1,000. But that's only from Hillingdon Borough, or for the most part. It's now, at any point now, going to go out to our adjacent boroughs of Brent, Ealing, Harrow and Hounslow. And if we have the same kind of participation rate, a month from now, we'll be up to 1,000. So we'll have some really high quality data, finding out about attitudes, various environmental influences, and by that I mean social and physical environments. We know there are problems with infrastructure, with roads and traffic, etc., and we want to know about those. But then we want to see how well they can predict behavior. And we've got a really great external partner on board in C-Sense, a company that produces some fantastic lights that also react to changing conditions on the road, including approaching traffic and headlights. But these lights can also be used to monitor cycle behavior. They have an associated app, so we can look at the frequency, the duration of cycle journeys, speeds, braking, swerving, all of these things and potential incidents, and we can have a mapping of what we get in the survey onto what people are actually doing on the roads. We're getting up to a nice time of year. The weather's hopefully getting better and warmer, and people are going to be more inclined over the next 6 months to be getting out on their bikes. The one-to-one assessments were a real eye-opener, weren't they, Ian? I think that's fair to say. And if you come into the workshop, you're going to get insights from Ian and Raz and Daryl on that note. But it did occur to me, could one-to-one training be a possibility? And I've got an image of motorcycle training there, effectively, where you've got radio mic type contact between the instructor and the learner. Because one thing that I thought was hugely useful about our protocol in the lab was the constant reinforcement from Tamara and the constant prompting from me. So there's a lot of learning. I think the learning curve was a steep one. And we saw it in the children's behavior. So on the checklist, we could see how they started to do the right things at the right time, eventually entirely independently.
Well done.
We've got... You can do it.
Really, really fascinating, fantastic, very, very exciting indeed. We do really need to move on, but Dan, and I would like to thank you both. I do think that was really, really extraordinary. I mean, just what we should be looking at and exploring and understanding and seeing how we can actually turn that into real life experience and get people cycling better and better. Really, really good.